Hi there, it's Claire. If you're hearing me, that means you're listening to the free preview of one of our Patreon episodes. We switch off every week between free and Patreon exclusive episodes, so if you'd like to hear the rest of this conversation, head over to patreon.com/thisguysucked and join our honorary haters club. A list of sensitive themes and topics included in this episode can be found in the episode description. Welcome to This Guy Sucked, the show where we prove that it's never too late to have haters and you can't libel the dead. I'm your host, Dr. Claire Aubin, and I'm a historian, writer, and most importantly, certified hater. On this show, we talk about people from throughout history with legacies that need a little updating, or in this case, highlighting. Whether it's because of their politics, their behavior, or their impact on society and culture, these guys actually kind of sucked. And we bring in a new scholar every week to tell us why. With me today is Craig Perry, who is an associate professor at Emory University and historian of, please tell me if I'm mischaracterizing any of this, slavery and Arab Islamic and Jewish culture in the medieval Middle East.
Right on the dot. Yes, perfect.
Okay. He has a new book out called Slavery and the Jews of Medieval Egypt, A History, which I am very grateful to have a copy of and to have read and talked with Craig about before we started recording. But we will be talking lots more about it on the episode. Welcome to the show.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me, Claire.
We always start with a little, quick question to ask you something that will show you have a personality and are a person. If you could right now magically dispel one common misunderstanding of the medieval world, what would it be?
Well, I think that a lot of times people use the medieval as an adjective to describe something that happens in modern life that they want to cast as extremely distasteful. And it usually betrays an incredible ignorance or lack of knowledge about the actual Middle Ages or medieval people or societies. And it's also a way of people dodging having to face down what's really kind of exceptional or unique about our contemporary moment. And so a lot of times when people call something medieval, they're trying to really diss it and talk about how evil it is. But a lot of times we would say, you know what? No, what you're talking about is you need to own that as a facet of contemporary and modern life and not to pass it off as a sort of relic of the Middle Ages, because in some ways, we can find in medieval history actually different ways of imagining the future and alternate ways of being in the world. And when people reduce medieval to an adjective which only means sort of backwards and barbaric, they're doing bad history, and they're also letting people in contemporary life off the hook.
Totally. I mean, there's a thing where you'll sort of be like, I'm trying to think of a bad thing. This detention center is positively medieval. And it's sort of it's a symptom of modernity. This thing that we're talking about is actually, that's not to say things like this didn't happen before now, but it is appearing in the way that it currently appears because of modern contemporary concerns. It's a symptom of the time we're currently living in, actually.
Yeah. And we can do things that are coercive on such a more massive scale, in the modern period and in the industrial age than could ever have been imagined, in the Middle Ages.
Yeah, even something's this is medieval torture, and you're talking about something stupid like one of those therapy guns or something, and you're they couldn't have even dreamed of this.
Right.
Right now. Yeah, that is a good one. And to be fair, that's a sort of, I think, a common choice from medievalists is to be you're using that word wrong, actually.
It is definitely, it is. I walked right into that cliche, and I will own it. It is something I feel that we feel people who work on this time period. And so, yeah, there it is.
I think that that's totally fair.
Yeah.
What I'm also, hopefully this episode helps to unfold some of this, but I think also the association of the Middle Ages or the medieval world, particularly in the US, with Europe is also a real problem in terms of common public understanding. They'll be I'm thinking of medieval guy, and they are sort of invariably thinking of a German who wouldn't have necessarily thought of himself that way, but some serf or something. And you're sort of the world existed beyond this at this moment in time.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of layers to that, right? One is exactly what you say. It's just like the association people have with medieval and Middle Ages is like King Arthur and Robin Hood, etc.
Yeah.
But in fact, right, at the same time, there were huge cities and thriving societies all over the world. And so I have a foot in, two main contexts. One is Jewish history of the Middle Ages, and the second one is sort of Arab Islamic culture, particularly in Egypt. And so I tell my students, like, look, if you were born a Jewish person, let's say in the year 1000, like overwhelmingly the chances are just based on numbers that you would have been born, in an Islamic country. You would probably have been an Arabic speaker, right? And so, really, if you're looking at telling a more global history of the Middle Ages, like you absolutely have to take into account this vast Islamic territory from Spain to India, into Central Asia, into Southeast Asia, and then even further beyond, like amongst diaspora communities. And so the same with Jewish history, because most Jews lived under Islamic rule. So
Hmm.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Let's foreground that. Like the Middle Ages is also Baghdad, is also Cairo, is also Fez in Morocco and Delhi in North India, as well as Paris and London and cities on the Rhineland in Germany.
And this leads us perfectly into what the topic is today. So we'll pretend that I was intentionally doing that, because we are going to be talking about someone who is not living in medieval Europe or a practice that's necessarily useful for the context of medieval Europe. And so, this all is going to come together here. Who/what are we talking about today on the episode?
So we're going to focus as our point of entry into our topic on a man that we're just going to call Ibn Jamahir. That's what he was known as. So this is an Arabic name. Ibn means son of, Jamahir, and it's a common way that people were called, right? So he has like a longer proper name. His full name is Abu Sa'id ibn Mahfud, and that's his Arabic name. He is Abu Sa'id, the son of somebody named Mahfud, and then he has a Hebrew name, Khalfon, the son of Shamaria. Because it's simpler, and because in fact people who lived in this time who knew this man just called him Ibn Jamahir, that's all I'm going to ask you to know. He was a merchant, so he was based in Cairo, but he traveled all through the world of the Western Indian Ocean. So from Cairo down the Nile River, across land to the Red Sea, down the Red Sea, past Yemen, where the Houthis are now trying to control traffic. Like he had to sort of cross transit that same sector, except he was worried about pirates, right?
I say people have been dodging stuff there for a long time.
Absolutely. It was like, even in the Middle Ages, it was for different reasons, could be a choke point of like medieval commerce.
Mm-hmm.
And then, out into the broader Indian Ocean. And he would have been one of many merchants this time who was headed to the western coast of India. And he might buy things like pepper, indigo, different kinds of spices and botanicals that were used in all sorts of things, textiles, right? And then he would work with his associates to bring them back to west, in this case to Egypt, where they would be sold and repackaged and sent even further across the Mediterranean. So this is our man Ibn Jamahir, but I'm interested in him. I'm going to kind of foreground one part of his story, and
Sure.
that's that he was, like many men of his class, his socioeconomic status, he was a slave owner. And I'll tell you about how I first encountered him. That's all right with you? And sort of,
Please. Yeah.
so we know about him because of a remarkable, I'm going to call it an archive, although it's not really an archive, from the Middle Ages. So one of the most remarkable depositories of documents. So people's court records, the deeds to their homes, their marriage contracts, their divorce deeds, wills of inheritance, accounts that they kept on scrap paper for what they were buying and selling, letters to their loved ones, etc. One of the main caches of this documentary material for the Middle Ages and the Islamic world survived in the attic of an Egyptian synagogue for about 1,000 years.
Whoa.
And so it was discovered, quote unquote, by sort of European antiquities collectors who were, going to the Middle East and purchasing valuable documents. Like, so local dealers would sell this material. And then finally, like Cambridge University, a figure from there came and hauled away almost 300,000 pieces of paper to Cambridge University. So this collection today is called the Cairo Geniza. A Geniza is like a secret storeroom where you put paper that has writing on it that you don't want to casually discard. The idea is that you bury it,
Mm-hmm.
but this material never got buried. So amongst this enormous cache of material, there's this, what I think is a beautiful 1,000-year-old piece of paper. So you look at it, it's like fairly intact. Not all these materials are. And it turns out that it's a deposition. So it's like a witness testimony. It's not signed, which probably means it was a copy made that was sent back to Cairo, but it was written down in a Red Sea port in what today is Sudan, or what today is actually kind of in a disputed triangle between Sudan and Egypt.
Mhm.
It was destroyed in the 14th century, but in its day, it was like sort of a bustling port that was kind of like the Wild West. People made fortunes there. People lost fortunes. People got murdered. People went there looking for ships to hop onto to go make their fortunes. And Ibn Jamahir passed through this place. It's called Aidlab, the city. And so we read that Ibn Jamahir, he's a Jewish man, but he goes to the Muslim governor of this port city. And he says, I demand that you punish this man. His name is Safi, who is a slave, because he has defamed me. So Jews, we could talk about this more, like Jewish men and Christian men who were protected subjects of the Islamic Caliphate, they could expect that Muslim judges and police would oftentimes provide justice for them and provide protection.
Mhm.
So this is not strange. So Ibn Jamahir, he demands this. The chief of police or governor sends out his foot soldiers to round up this slave, and they bring him before the governor. And Ibn Jamahir demands that he recant. And this man, Safi, he refers to himself as a slave, says, no. He said, you had a slave woman, you got her pregnant, and when she bore you a boy, you banished her and her son to Somalia. And so he says, I am not going to recant.
Fair.
Ibn Jamahir says, I demand, that this guy be punished. And Safi says indignantly, you can sort of read this between the lines, how dare you try to punish me? Do you know who I am? I am the slave of the head of the Rabbinic Academy in Cairo.
Mhm.
Right? So this dramatic confrontation, an enslaved man standing up to a free man of, some status and sticking to his guns and saying, you have done a horrible deed and I'm not going to apologize or recant.
It's also sort of like you can imagine being like, what do you mean I'm going to get in trouble because you did something bad? Like, what do you mean? And the issue is that I'm telling the truth about this thing that you've done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not good.
No, not good. It's easy to hate on Ibn Jamahir for good reason.
Sure.
And so Ibn Jamahir denies it, but there are more layers to this too that we can talk about. The reason we have this record is it was written down not by Ibn Jamahir. It was written down by another group of Jewish merchants who also happened to be in this port city of Aidlab. And the fact that they wrote this down and saved it and sent it to Cairo where it survived for 1,000 years, and the way that it's written sort of shows us that they think Safi is right and that Ibn Jamahir is lying, and that they think what Ibn Jamahir did by involving the Muslim governor, and Safi gets flogged, he gets whipped, and he gets thrown in jail.
Mm-hmm.
They think it's a reprehensible act. The governor sent for these Jewish merchants to come. The Jewish merchants hid because maybe even in our own time, people don't like to get noticed by the authorities, right? It's just very little good can come of it. So
Sure.
some Jewish men try to hide. They don't want anything to do with this episode, but they're found and they are brought and forced to watch Safi be punished, right? One of these other Jewish merchants goes to the governor and tries to plead with him, look, you should not punish Safi. We don't know more than that. But we know that Ibn Jamahir he also had Muslim colleagues who were traders, and he got them to apply sort of pressure on these Jewish merchants to sort of acquiesce, right? To sort of drop it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have this confrontation amongst men who are all kind of the class of people that would own a slave in the Middle Ages, most of them. So for them, slavery, they knew it could be bad, was evil. But the thing about it was important to be a good slave owner and not a bad slave owner. They didn't have an idea that slavery would ever be abolished, or that was something that was unthinkable to them. But they did have a sense that slavery could be an evil, especially if it was done, especially capriciously, right, or poorly.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have this sort of dramatic setting that kind of brings all that to the fore and is emblematic in other ways in which this woman, who's never named, it's 10 or 13 words in which she appears in the archive and then poof, she's gone. This is also characteristic of how most enslaved people, when we try to tell their stories, it's about how they appear in writing, not telling their own story, usually as like a footnote to like a larger conflict. And we have to really read between the lines to sort of learn more about her. And I can't tell you more about that woman besides what we hear in this accusation that she was sent away to Somalia, probably meaning she was sold to a different owner.
Mm-hmm.
But there are scores of other women like her who were bound to men and women in Cairo and beyond. So the book I wrote starts with Ibn Jamahir and this really dramatic showdown over this accusation. And it uses that as sort of this opening onto this broader world of slave owning, its culture, the slave trade,
Mm-hmm.
both like interregionally and locally. And then ultimately, like, what can we know about the lives of enslaved people, the lives of free people, and how they were part of the larger communities, of Muslims and Christians and Jews who were the main groups in Cairo. But I'm focused, because of the sources I'm studying, I'm focusing on sort of slavery in the Jewish community of medieval Egypt.
Thanks for listening to this preview of a Patreon exclusive episode. To subscribe and listen to it in full, head over to patreon.com/thisguysucked.